in which I returned to reviewing Tokyo Ghoul at last. It's been a week or two at least, between real life and work and other reviews. I just haven't gotten around to it, even though this review is only of the first, 9 chapters of Tokyo Ghoul. But until now we are here, and that's all that matters. So, we've got 2 rather short arcs going on here. The arc list that I was using, called the Introduction arc and the Nishiki arc. So picking up right after Kaneki wakes up after being attacked by Rise, and he receives an organ transplant from her. Kaneki lives, Rise dies. This is actually one development that I found interesting simply on the basis that I knew of Rise as a character prior to beginning Tokyo Ghoul. And so the simple fact that she has appeared to be eliminated from the story at such an early point, in spite of appearing to have something of a significant impact, as she's remembered by the readers, it's kind of strange to me, and so I'm actually quite suspicious. I don't think she's gone entirely. I don't really know how she could remain, although I could theorize that it could be something to do with a connection to Kaneki of sorts, and so we sort of, explore her character through his. And of course, there's flashback scenes, relationships between her and other ghouls and whatnot could be a possibility as well. I mean, just in these few chapters alone, the number of times Toka and Nishiki have mentioned Rise, it's honestly quite impressive. Regardless, long story short, Kaneki finds himself in a position where he is essentially neither human nor ghoul. Given that his body contains the organs of a ghoul, he can no longer consume human food. We learn this by an extensive period, several chapters worth, honestly, of experimentation as to what Kaneki can and cannot eat, and the results are abysmal. In fact, he can only consume ghoul food, namely humans. This is naturally problematic for him. Humans and coffee. Minor nitpick. I must admit that is a funny little, one exception to the usual, ghoul food rule. And I guess Shida likes coffee a lot, maybe. But this is naturally a problem for Kaneki, because Kaneki has no desire to eat people. This is completely understandable. And yet, that is the only thing that he can eat, and naturally starving himself is an excruciatingly painful state of existence. What to do about this? This is the central dilemma of Tokyo Ghoul up to this point. And actually, for me, the point where this actually gets very interesting is a bit of the subversion of the idea that Kaneki is neither human nor ghoul. The old man at Inteku, I can't remember his name, but when he, at the end of chapter 9, when he corrects Kaneki and says that it's not that Kaneki is neither human nor ghoul, it's that he is both human and ghoul. He's not necessarily excluded from both worlds. He actually has the unique chance to become a part of both of them. And, in fact, he has to if he wants to keep on living. And that will, of course, be a big part of the story. Kaneki will probably be the vehicle by which we explore both of these 2 worlds, both sides of this conflict, going back and forth between the 2 sides of the issue, I would imagine. The humans who naturally want to eliminate the ghouls for their own safety, and the ghouls who naturally need to eat humans to survive. The moral quandary, of course, is real. I suppose that both are correct in a literal sense, but what is interesting is the deliberate change in perspective that the old man offers. It sort of contrasts with the constant hell we've gotten for the first few chapters. It's also an interesting character point that both Kaneki and Toka automatically assumed the negative option. There is an extent to which that this is the more natural assumption to assume the worst, but it probably actually says a lot about each of them, that neither of them were capable of thinking of this in a positive manner initially. I don't know if it's just a lack of maturity thing, or if it's actually just an innate part of our characters to think in a negative sense. But ultimately, the old guy, I can't remember his name, but his Kaneki situation is, at least to an extent, it will be what he makes of it. As for whether this idea will continue to be the case, we will see. But I suppose, aside from that, it's basically what happened these few chapters. It wasn't terribly much in terms of plot. Obviously, we're introduced to Nishiki, and then we got the first conflict, where, Kaneki eats a person for the first time thanks to Toka, where he defends Hide against Nishiki, that sort of thing. But what are my general thoughts on Tokyo Ghoul at the moment? I think that I'm still at that weird phase of sort of getting caught up in the hype of a series before I've reached the point that people get hyped about. It's just like, that early sense of friction between expectations and what something actually is at the start. These are the early chapters, and early chapters, they are really, really difficult to instruct, and he did a pretty good job of it, I must admit, but they do remain early chapters, and so I'm not terribly invested yet, and so I understand that they're not going to be good as the rest, but still, they're effective at doing what they need to do. They introduce much of the major cast. I feel like I've got a decent understanding of Kaneki, of Hide, of Toka, and of Nishiki. They stand out from one another. They each have their own unique voice. They've got their own unique characterization. They work. World building is solid. I feel like I've got the basics of how ghouls function, like a social sense down. They are very territorial. And the Anteku sort of seems to function as something of just like an overseer, so that things don't get too far out of line. Things don't get too chaotic, because the ghouls seem to tend to exist in a very less than organized state by their very nature. They're very aggressive, naturally. The initial thought would be, of course, that, that's how they naturally are. And this, of course, may be the case, but you can speculate a little bit more, and it may simply be sort of, from a defensive standpoint, naturally their very existence is challenged, and not without good reason. But that they would lash out sort of does make a little bit of sense. I'm not going to say it's justified, I'm not going to say it's bad, but it makes logical sense that they would tend to be very aggressive, very, very defensive of themselves immediately, but without even considering someone might not be out to hurt them. We see the difference, especially in Toka, I think, who transforms from being quite a mild-mannered young woman to being incredibly aggressive, just like at the flip of a switch. And like horror, of course, she just got that down. This is obvious. I don't really even need to discuss it that much. Regardless, I do believe that we are going to need to move beyond the horror very soon, as that really was the defining characteristic of these first two chapters. There's a little bit that I can, analyze, pick apart, but there's not that much yet. What's interesting, I guess, would be the literary references. They're the most interesting to me at the moment, but I don't really know how they're going to, manifest themselves in the rest of the story yet, so I can't, pick them apart as I want to. And, I don't mind horror, of course, but horror is never really something that impresses me in itself. Horror for horror's sake is sort of meaningless. I'm not impressed by things simply because they're dark and mature. I don't think that darkness equals maturity. I think that both lighthearted shows and dark shows, or manga, lighthearted manga, dark manga, they can each be compelling in their own way, and it's neither the lightness nor the darkness that makes a show good. Whether it's a positive show or a cynical show, doesn't really matter. It's sort of generally how those two they sort of play off of each other that really makes things interesting for me. The themes, the characters, the plot, they make the story, not just, it's so awful, that makes it great. Not really. And this story is just got to go a little bit further along the way before I can see those things that I like. I see the potential completely. I just haven't been given the payoff of it yet, but I'm just 9 chapters in and I know nothing, so yeah. Well, actually, I do know that I love Hide. I'm sure of that fact. I love him a lot. But yeah, I think that is all I have to say. Man, I barely said anything about Nishiki, even though this arc is sort of named after him. I guess it's just that he hasn't left that much of an impression on me yet. Honestly, he's currently lacking in redeeming qualities at this point of the story, and so I don't really care terribly much for him in any sense. I mean, I'm sure that will be remedied later. I've heard that the general characterization in Tokyo Ghoul tends to be pretty good, so I don't know. Regardless, that is all that I have to say about the first 9 chapters of Tokyo Ghoul. I looked at a chapter list earlier, and I saw that the next arc, the Dove's Emergence arc, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly, it's significantly longer than these 2 little ones. So I'm looking forward to that. I would imagine that we are going to meet a lot more of the cast, as Kaneki seems to be almost ready to begin to look a little bit more deeply into the world of Ghoul, so I guess we would be meeting a lot more of the Ghoul cast, getting more development in that regard. That I think that's definitely a direction the story wants to head in. That we're trying to humanize the ghouls, I suppose, and trying to make both sides of this issue, the human side and the ghoul side, seem reasonable. regardless of, even though they're completely at loggerheads. I think that that's the direction that Tokyo Ghoul is going to go, and that we have the intersection of those two things in Kaneki. I think that that is what Tokyo Ghoul would be. So, thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, and or subscribe. If you've got any more advice for a starting Tokyo Ghoul fan, that's always great. Any chapters that you would like to see specific reviews for, or specific reactions for, I may or may not do them depending on how I feel on that day, but definitely arc reviews, and I know that a lot of chapters further along down the road that I've received a list for, I will be doing reading reactions for. So, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon.